Right, let's start. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this afternoon's FIA webinar on regional security dialogue. Asking the question, what is the Nordic contribution? So what has been the legacy in the past and how that legacy can be seen contributing in contemporary situation in multiple different processes. I'm Mika Aaltola, Director of the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. As I already pointed out, there's quite a lot of Nordic contributions in security dialogue. In a couple of years, we will mark the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Accords. That was a major achievement, taking quite a lot of effort on multiple different fronts in order to pull it together. But there are many other examples of Nordic contributions. And today we will be listening experts, top-notch, excellent set of speakers, setting the scene for us for this conversation, and let's keep it as a conversation as much as we can. And let's also focus on dialogue processes, security dialogues that are ongoing, for example, in the MENA region, background talks on the Iran nuclear deal. As I already pointed out, we have the pleasure and privilege of being joined by great minds of the field. For example, we will first hear, unfortunately her camera cannot be turned on, but we will hear from Susanna Di Macchio, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, one of the foremost experts and practitioners of diplomatic dialogues, especially with countries that have limited or no official relationships with US, such as Iran and North Korea. For decades, she has been leading track 1.5 and track 2 conversations to help policymakers identify pathways for diplomatic process on range of issues related to security, non-proliferation, conflict de-escalation, risk reduction, bilateral relations. She's currently the board chair and co-founder of Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, and also an associate fellow at SIPRI. And I had the pleasure of meeting her here in Helsinki during the past 2 days, and I have to say that I have learned quite a lot. I had the privilege of learning quite a lot when it comes to different activities. After her, we will hear from a very prominent figure, Jan Eliasson, Swedish diplomat, chair of the SIPRI. The list is very long when it comes to achievements and positions. Deputy Secretary General of UN, Sweden's Minister for Foreign Affairs, President of the UN General Assembly, the 60th session, and the list goes on and on. So glad that you could join us this afternoon. And then we will hear from Kai Sauer, one of our own, who has been working as a permanent representative of Finland to UN, as an ambassador of Finland to Indonesia, Timor-Leste, and ASEAN, former director at the Unit for UN Affairs at the Finnish Foreign Ministry, senior advisor to the special representative of the Secretary General, President Martti Ahtisaari. So quite accomplished list of speakers. I will keep the introduction short because I know Kai appreciates that quite a lot. So let's go down to the business.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad to be among friends. I have known both Susanna for a long time and Kai Sauer from my time, particularly in the UN, but also from earlier roles that we both have had. So it's a conversation among friends that I enjoy having. First, a couple of words about the Nordic countries and their engagement in international cooperation and mediation and conflict resolution. I think it goes back to the 20s at the League of Nations time. Sweden was very active at the time and trusted very much in international cooperation and international law, structures of international law. Were very much part of our foreign policy already in the 20s. Believe it or not, there is a mountain on the border between Bulgaria and Greece, where the later coming foreign minister Östen Undén was mediating. He was an arbiter, and he arbitrated in favor of Bulgaria, and the mountain is called Östen Undén. So there is a Swedish mountain in the borderland of Bulgaria, just as an anecdote. But then it went on, and the UN was established, and I think Sweden and not least Finland were called in several conflicts. Cyprus, Middle East, Tomioja, Yaring. We were then neutral countries and non-aligned, if you use another lingo, and not member of an alliance, which I think made us attractive, together with our strong belief in international law and the United Nations. So this is probably part of our foreign policy DNA, I would say: international cooperation, trust in international law, and strengthening the international rule of law. We also have experiences practically in creating cooperation networks. The Nordic communities cooperation was very close already in the 50s. We had a passport union, we had free labor movements and so forth already. We were more integrated than the European Union, even in the 50s. And that cooperation still exists, although I must say the pandemics gave a big blow to the movement of people between the Nordic countries. But I hope that was a temporary problem. We also were very active in terms of setting up the OSCE. Finland had an enormously important meeting in 1975, where the final act was in my view, the first step to the end of the Cold War, because they opened up for security dialogue, for economic exchange, for people-to-people contacts, human rights even. All these so-called baskets were filled with activities, and I think it played a very important role in the process that led to the wall tumbling down 14 years later. And Sweden and Finland were very much part of those confidence-building measures that came up in the 80s. Of course, then you have the European Union, where Finland and Sweden joined in 1995, which interestingly led to more of Norwegian activities, because Norway was outside the European Union, while we, of course, were committed to the European Union positions on many foreign policy issues. And that opened up an opportunity for Norway, and they certainly did so in an extremely impressive way. The capacity of Norway in mediation efforts is very, very high. And they are very active and have kept that up over the years in a very impressive manner. But Sweden and Finland have kept pace, certainly, and not only through personalities, but also through organizations like CMI and CIPRI, I would say. And Norway has their PRIO and other organizations. Now, to conclude, I would say a few words about leading up. This should lead up to the discussion on regional security in the MENA region, and in particular the Persian Gulf, or if you see it from another perspective, the Gulf area, where I have worked very much for a long time. In fact, I was part of the creation of Resolution 598, which ended the war between Iran and Iraq in 1988. And I remember being one of those who insisted on a paragraph in that resolution that called for regional security mechanisms for that region, not only between Iran and Iraq, but also with other countries in the region. I always remind my friends and colleagues that this is a binding resolution, and we should really pursue that paragraph. We never reached it in practical terms. But the political conjunctures haven't been very favorable to moving in that direction, mainly because of a lack of interest, to put it mildly, from the Arab side, mostly Saudi Arabia, in bringing Iran into that regional structure. It was very firm and harsh position, and it was also made more dramatic or more even harder because of the Syria war, where, of course, Iran was on the side of the Syrian government, and most Arab states were, of course, on the side of those who were against Assad at that time. So you need to have enough interest in the region to bring out a structure of this nature. There has to be a minimum of political will on both the Iranian side and the Arab side. Now, recently there have been some interesting indications of a growing interest of some. Some of them have demonstrated interest for a long time, like Oman and even Kuwait, and maybe some of the other Gulf countries too. Saudi Arabia has been the one that has resisted mostly any role whatsoever for Iran in the region because of their regional activities, which go counter to Saudi interests. There is now evidently some type of discussion going on, which is an interesting phenomenon, because if there is an interest on the side of all, on any side of the Gulf, to move in this direction, then I think it can proceed rather quickly. They are the ones who have to do it. This is nothing that can be imposed or brought out by Nordics or Europeans and others, but I think there are some ideas that they could pick up from the both Nordic cooperation, but mainly also the OSCE cooperation, the particularly confidence building measures that I think is extremely important. And this will affect also this very important element of reducing mistrust, which there is a lot of in the area. And there, I think we could have a role to play. We organizations that work with these issues, CIPRI has worked on issues related to both the JCPOA, of course, in recent years, very intensely so in different forms. CMI, similarly, Kai will speak for himself and for Finland. But we also have done work on regional security from the CIPRI side and doing research and had conferences and meetings on that. So we are prepared to put our expertise at the disposal of anyone who is interested in really bringing out such a structure that in the end would make possible political dialogue, economic exchange, and people-to-people contacts. And for instance, a wonderful new possibility would be finally to get some exchange between universities and students on both sides of the Gulf. So that would be my introduction to the subject, and I hope that Susanne was connected to at least part of this.
Yeah, she seems to be there. She's online, and thank you, Jan, on starting the conversation and also reminding one key tradition, important traditional legacy, kind of the Nordic peace research that started actively in 1960s, that resulted in institutions that you referred to, COPRI, CIPRI, PRIO, in Finland, TAPRI, and there's quite a lot of that experience in the Nordic country, and you quite rightly also pointed out that if there's a regional confidence building initiatives, the ownership has to be in the region itself, and kind of facilitating that is, of course, one way of approaching, kind of applying the lessons learned in the Nordic region, but appreciating the regional dimension that needs to be there. But with that, Susanne, if you may, you could go now. Go next.
Yes. Thank you, Mika. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
And Jan, I heard every word of what you said, and of course I agree 100%. In fact, you'll see some overlap with what I'm going to say. So first, let me apologize for having technical difficulties, but hopefully you all can hear me well. Let me thank the organizers. It's a real pleasure to be part of this panel with Mika and especially with Jan and Kai. One highlight of my work has been my ability to work with both Sweden and Finland over these past now 20 years on issues related to the topic of this panel discussion. I've been inspired by your efforts, Jan and Kai, and applying the Nordic spirit to my own work in this field, thanks to both of you. So I'm happy to share some thoughts. In particular, I've been asked to bring in a US perspective. I've been involved in informal discussions focused on the prospect of establishing a viable de-escalation framework in the Middle East with officials, with scholars and mediators based in the region and elsewhere. Also exploring potentially multilateral cooperation strategies based in the Middle East. Along the way, we've had good conversations, but practically have been met with various obstacles. Timing hasn't been right and so forth. But I think there are some dynamics underway that suggest the timing actually might be right to revisit some of these ideas. I just want to run through a few notable developments. From the US point of view, the first big development is we have a new administration in Washington. And the Biden administration is taking a very different approach to the region. It has set as an early foreign policy goal reconstituting the nuclear deal with Iran, also known as the JCPOA. And as we all know, current talks are ongoing in Vienna. Returning to the JCPOA is important for the Biden administration, first and foremost, because it will concretely advance a key US national security interest, namely the rolling back of Iran's nuclear program. But it also goes beyond this. It advances several other additional priorities. By reversing the previous administration's failed maximum pressure policy, which, let's be frank, has led to the ramping up of Iran's nuclear program. They're now enriching at 60%. That's up from enriching uranium, I should say. That's up from 3.67% when the deal was in play. And during this period, we were also brought to the brink of war, US and Iran, following the Soleimani killing. So for the US, a good way to look at the JCPOA is that it also is a way to de-escalate, to help open the door for diplomacy as a way forward. So it's not only a very effective non-proliferation agreement, but it's also a de-escalation mechanism. Lower the temperature between US and Iran in particular, and then the Biden team would like to build on the nuclear agreement. Getting back in the deal also provides the entry point for the continuation of talks with Iran on other nuclear issues, also as well as concerns, regional concerns. Biden's advisors also have indicated that the US should no longer focus so much energy and resources on the Middle East. In fact, when you talk to them and they outline their thinking, they place Asia as the first priority for the US, followed by Europe, Latin America, and then the Middle East. So they see turning attention to China and Asia more generally as a bigger US interest. There is an intention to reduce the US military footprint in the region. We see that already starting now in South Asia and Afghanistan. The goal would be to perhaps reduce to a counterterrorism presence, enough of a force posture in the Persian Gulf to deter Iran. We'll see if we get there, but that's, I think, a strategy that they have in mind. And of course, none of this would be feasible if Iran's nuclear program is not rolled back. So ultimately, finding a more constructive approach with Iran is essential to the sustainable redeployment from U.S. forces from the region, and the JCPOA provides a way forward. One of the first initiatives that the Biden team took in the realm of foreign policy is ending U.S. support for the war in Yemen and supporting negotiations towards a political settlement. And they're suspending some sales of official offensive weapons. So this isn't a break in the relationship, which still holds great value for the U.S., but it's more of a course correction. So as a result of these changes, not surprising, we're seeing a shift in the political calculations of both Riyadh and Tehran. There's been a flurry of diplomacy in the region, most notably a nascent dialogue between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We've also seen the Saudis visiting Damascus for a dialogue with Syria, and other diplomatic activities taking place. So bringing us back now to building security architecture in the Persian Gulf. Given these developments, perhaps the timing is right to think about these ideas. As Jan said, these aren't ideas to be imposed from the West by any stretch of the imagination. They have to be homegrown and applied within the region. But I think there is an opportunity to benefit from what's been done before, particularly from Nordic experiences. There's the prospect for applying some aspects of the Helsinki process to the Middle East. It's not a perfect fit by any stretch of the imagination, and there are many issues when we think about it. But still, I think there's some lessons learned and best practices that should be thought through. Another possible entry point for the dialogue is UN Security Council Resolution 598. Jan Eliasson played a leading role in conjuring that resolution when he was a member of the UN mission that mediated the end of the Iran-Iraq war. This resolution includes a mandate for the UN Secretary General to convene a regional dialogue, and that mandate still exists. So just to conclude, I think a way forward we can think about is maybe utilizing the Nordic experience and perhaps thinking about unofficial track 2 or track 1.5 dialogue as a possibility to informally test ideas, develop ideas, and then maybe transfer them to track 1. That's very ambitious, but I think it's something that should be explored. So I think it's too early to conclude to say that the stars are aligning towards a more better atmosphere to pursue these ideas. But what I will say is there are indications of some positive trends we haven't seen in a while. I think it's time to test these propositions and see if we can promote confidence building in the region.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And on that note, we posted in the chat our recent briefing paper on the applicability of the Helsinki process to MENA region, and you already referred that the stars might be aligning in a right way to start thinking about something like that. Other authors have said that it's far too early, that there should be first the kind of a Peace of Westphalia type of situation in the Middle East before we can proceed to anything what happened in Helsinki in 1975. But I'm glad to hear, Susan, that things are changing for the positive in this respect. And next, let's turn to Kai, who has quite a lot of experience on this field.
Okay, thank you, Mika, and it's really a great pleasure to be on the same panel with Susan and Jan. It really feels like being among friends. We go a long way back. Susan is is somebody who has had a lot of influence on the U.S. administration's policies in certain areas, continues to influence it. And Jan, of course, I think after Dag Hammarskjöld, Jan is the greatest Swedish UN diplomat of all times. Tremendous respect for him and his work. And Jan, what you said about the Nordics in the UN is absolutely true. We do many things together, but I think there are also certain differences. And one difference is, of course, that 3 of the Nordics, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, were founding members of the United Nations. Iceland joined 1 year later, and Finland joined only 10 years later. And there was a reason for that, and the reason was, of course, the Cold War. And the big difference between Finland and the other Nordics is also that we joined only 10 years after finishing three wars, which sort of determined also our UN profile. In the beginning, the UN for us was something the EU is now, giving us more diplomatic space, more space to maneuver in the world, which is not always friendly. Our position was also restricted by limited resources. Our geographical position defines our policies in many ways. We have to invest a lot in security, and we can afford investing less in development. So while we are trying, well, consciously or unconsciously to reach the 2% GDP limit spend on security, we might be less. It might be less possible for us to reach 0.7% of development, a threshold which other Nordics have passed with flying flags. But nevertheless, the Nordics are a very tight family in the UN and other multilateral fora. The group is tighter than the European Union, and we have a lot of features in common going back to the 50s, as Jan explained. And I think we have also a lot of experience in not only in multilateralism, but also in minilateralism, because we have so many interwoven and overlapping regional structures in our region, in the Baltic Sea region, in the Arctic region, and then gradually expanding to the EU, OSCE, UN, and then you probably have many others in between. But it's a network and web where the Nordics usually work very well together, although some Nordics belong to clubs where others are not members, like EU and NATO, of course. But there also we have then friends in clubs where we are no members. Then when it comes to the Middle East or the Gulf, which has been mentioned as one of the topics of this discussion, I think it's very interesting. It's an interesting thought to use the OSCE as a model for the Gulf. And SIPRI, as Jan said, has worked a lot intellectually to develop this concept. There have been other think tanks doing the same, like the International Crisis Group, very advanced, and FIA or UPI has followed in the footsteps, and I think there's now a network of think tanks which is convening on regular basis to exchange ideas to this subject. Now, how do you bring this from the level of an intellectual exercise to concrete politics or intergovernmental activities? I think it requires a change in the circumstances, and the change has happened or is taking place as we speak. It is moving into a direction where this intellectual concept might become interesting to policymakers. We see some signs of that. JCPOA talks in Vienna is one sign. Regular meetings between Saudi Arabia and Iran taking place in Iraq is another sign. And of course, the US changed policy is kind of, it's a driving motivation in creating the new circumstances. So this is the scene pretty much. We have to see in which direction it will move, and if it moves far enough into the right direction, then of course we might be ready to offer our services. It can be the Nordics, it can be a coalition of friendly governments. It can be an organization. I think this is all undetermined yet. The UN might want to play a role as well, but this is surely something interesting and something which was also more or less corresponding to our political objectives. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to continue with the Q&A.
Excellent, Kai. And to remind all of our audience, you can post questions in the chat function and comments as well. But as a chair, I'm in a privileged position to continue this discussion, and Kai already pointed out that something akin to the Helsinki process might be implementable in the Gulf region, in the MENA region. But if you look into different indicators of that, Kai pointed out that there has been proposals and initiatives and networks. One good sign was also Chatham House report that was published recently, that interviewed quite a lot of experts in the topic, on the topic, and 24% of them were saying that it might be effective way of bringing something similar to Helsinki spirit into the region. All of the speakers already referred to this and also the difficulties of it. But could you kind of what would be the ways, what would be the tracks of approaching such initiative now when US is no longer standing on the way of it and actually is a little bit showing also a green light towards the idea? How do you see the possibilities and obstacles? Jan?
Well, I agree with Suzanne and Kai that I think the timing seems to me to be positive. I think the time is ripe now for moving from the ideas that have been there for a long time to some type of practical next steps. And what is to me obvious is that UN, of course, has a responsibility to fulfill Resolution 598, paragraph 8. It is a binding Security Council resolution. And I know that DPPA is looking into this rather actively, and I think they have an instrument in their hand which is very important. On the other hand, of course, it's very important, as we all three agreed, that this is nothing that can be imposed on this region. But also in this moment, it seems to be a growing interest to bring in an Iranian element. It was never the case for GCC or the Arab League, not to speak about individual governments' positions like from the Saudi Arabia. Now there is a realization that they have to work out some type of common security system. And I think the starting point should be the enlightened self-interest. I was a young diplomat back in 1975, and I remember when we produced these so-called 3 baskets of cooperation. We filled them pretty quickly with contents. It was first security issues, security dialogue. Secondly was economic and trade aspects. And thirdly was people-to-people contacts, cultural context, and so forth. These 3 baskets were filled with issues that were of interest to each member of both Eastern and Western Europe at the time, and Russia and US. And we identified what was in our enlightened self-interest. And I would say for the area, for the Persian Gulf area or Gulf area, you can easily look into what kind of interest you may have to have a good regional structure, not only to preserve peace and not get into these horrible wars all the time in the Middle East, but also from very concrete interests at home. If you have developed a cooperation, for instance, in the area of shipping, or in the area of energy, or in the area of environment and transport generally, if you have a system of establishing people-to-people contacts, university contacts, think tank contacts, then you have actually a process starting. And if you take as a starting point to identify what you would put into those so-called baskets with their concerns, then there is a dynamic hopefully coming from them. Then I'm sure that CPRI and CMI and many other actors who have been following this could easily provide ideas, research, but also provide venues if necessary to have such discussions, which need to bring in as many actors as possible. So I think we should move to this stage of identifying what would be the elements of regional security to make the project attractive to the parties, and also leave it to them to think of how they could, contribute and gain from regional cooperation. It is not something you do for its own sake. It's because you want to combine national and regional and international interests. Over to you.
Yes, quite right. Susanna or Kai, would you like to step in with your own ideas?
Yeah, I could do that in the wake of what Jan just said, with which I totally agree. Replicating the CSCE or OSCE is nothing new. This idea has been around in the Middle East and in the Gulf region for quite some time. There's interest in Asia and in taking lessons from the Helsinki process, but somehow it has not yet materialized or concretized. There have been initiatives from countries in the region. Iran, for instance, they have launched the HOPE initiative, which is the Hormuz Peace Endeavor initiative, which was immediately and vehemently supported by Russia. But the problem is that if one party comes up with such an initiative and it is backed by only one permanent member of the Security Council, it's hardly winning any hearts and minds in other quarters or in other parts of the Arabian Peninsula. So it has to have a broader base. So then I would look at the at the motives of the different countries. I mean, this self-interest Jan was referring to. What would motivate countries in the region and outside to create such a security framework, or at least a process of confidence-building measures? For the US, I think it's quite clear now. This is kind of simplifying it, but putting it shortly, the US wants the region to become more stable and take responsibility for itself, for its own security, in order not to consume US resources. For Iran, the motive is to fix its economy, get back to the international table, especially economically, and lighten the US footprint in the region. For Saudi Arabia, UAE, and maybe some others, it is to manage security with a lighter US footprint, which is coming eventually. And for Iraq, another important player in this equation, the motivation might be simply to regain credibility in the process of recovering from a very existential crisis, and to reduce power of external and internal spoilers. So you have a group of countries with mixed motivations, which you could interpret are showing or pointing into the same direction. Now the tricky part is to coordinate this and to take it into one process. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai. Susan.
Yes, let me make a few comments while agreeing with Kai and Jan. So as I mentioned, I think for the United States, the key game changer has been the change in administration. So unlike the previous administration, what we see is the Biden administration is interested in encouraging an effective mode of mutual engagement, regional dialogue among the GCC and countries and Iran, and between Riyadh and Tehran more specifically, whether that's under UN auspices or through another multilateral venue. So the direct channel we are now seeing between Tehran and Riyadh, with Iraq playing the convening role, the meetings in Baghdad at the invitation of Prime Minister al-Kadhimi. Secretary Blinken was asked about that, and it's clear that the administration is not coming out encouraging it too strongly, because that could be the kiss of death. But they're not discouraging either. As Secretary Blinken said, the bilateral approach directly between Iran and the Saudis is even better than the US taking a lead role. Trying to take down tensions is a positive thing. And as I said, it's very early days, and we have yet to see if this nascent opening actually gains traction. But how to explore it, I think when I look at the Helsinki process, the basic principles that were elaborated might be a good place to start as the building blocks in the case of the Helsinki process: non-interference, sovereignty, the protection of religious rights. Could these three principles, or the region's own version of these principles, provide the basic norms of conduct between regional states, how they deal with each other, and the standards for mutual relations? That could be a discussion that could be started in a track 1.5 setting that includes representation from the region in an informal capacity to have candid discussions. I think that would be very productive. And the UN role is also interesting to me. The Secretary General has an existing mandate to consult with states of the region to pursue measures to enhance security and stability of the region. This could be the basis for the convening of a dialogue under the auspices of the UN. And I think Jan is right. If the key players in the region, with support from the P5, signaled interest in pursuing this, I think the UN Secretary General and certainly the UN Department for Political Affairs would be willing to explore it. So those are a couple of way forwards. There certainly is a need to provide structure, and I think that's what we're talking about. But the immediate need to me is building confidence, and that's the most urgent. And we know developing multilateral collective approaches to problem solving is very time consuming. It's fraught with challenges, everything from accommodating the interests that Kai talked about of the participants and the numerous players, to dealing with real and perceived asymmetries in power and so forth. So this work is not for the faint of heart. It's especially challenging in the context of the Middle East. And I think the absence of confidence in some ways is the greatest enemy. And that's why I think looking to models as starting points could help provide the basis for some very difficult discussions that need to be taking place.
Thanks, Susanne. And we have first questions from the audience as well. And Tytti Erästö, ex-colleague of mine from Tampere years, points out that is the kind of the OSCE or the Helsinki process, is it a progressive model anymore at all when you see the crumbling of the security dialogue and security, the confidence building in Europe recently? So it seems that the kind of the institutions that were dedicated to this task are no longer working that well. So is the kind of the using that as a model, is that appealing anymore at all? So kind of a critical remark on the model aspect of the Helsinki process or the institutions of OSCE. And then we have also a question related, a critical question concerning the Nordic tendency to brand the Nordic cooperation, kind of a surface level branding of it based on trust and sustainability and welfare, instead of kind of a branding active understanding of security in a particular way and actually doing something in the world, instead of just communicating a nice brand on the Nordic experience and positive legacies. So two kind of a critical comments from the audience. How would the panelists reflect on these?
Well, you should always be self-critical and avoid putting your own principles and values giving a higher quality than others. But I think the gains that we have made through very long negotiations and long political processes must be preserved. If you have Resolution 598 there, it's a resource, but for many years it wasn't used because of the political situation. The situation during the Cold War was horrible before we established a system that gave us a platform. That platform is there, both for security dialogue between East and West, and the economic exchange and people-to-people contacts. So it's just a matter of political will of the member states to use what has been produced diplomatically and do it pragmatically. You can't just be, of course, nostalgic and go back and think this is the world of 1975. My God, it's a hugely different picture. But if you have these structures that have helped us in the work on European security, then if they independently will find out of their own interest that they could pick up some ideas of the OSCE structure or the Resolution 598 and so forth, and also take that as a starting point, because it also has a legal and formal role. I said now for the third time, the Security Council resolution is binding. We must do this, in fact. That's the 598 paragraph 8. And now it's time to do it. And then you do it, of course, with today's political realities well analyzed. One idea that I just got here now is that we have to also look at the JCPOA dynamics on this situation. We all wait for the outcome of the talks in Vienna. It has taken a long time for many. Evidently, they think it's too long, but if it ends well, fine. We hope that we will see a decision of withdrawal and compliance for compliance on both sides. One thing that could follow after that, in my view, would be if this council would, in some form, informally, through a press statement or a oral statement, express the hope that the member states will now proceed to have a discussion on regional security. It could even reach the form of a new resolution suggesting that be the case, but not imposing something from the Security Council, but handing over the issue to all the states related to this, and then they will want to start a process on identifying their interest, and then they will then choose or discuss which kind of body and which format the discussions would take place, and where also we who are involved in different ways will give our contributions. But I think there is also the negative scenario. If you don't reach the JCPOA agreement from the US, and if you get, perhaps, you never know what happens after the presidential elections in Iran, you may have another situation, then I still claim that there is a reason to continue with regional security. Maybe it's even a stronger reason to move on regional security if we have continued troubles with JCPOA. But that's perhaps a provocative ideas to some. But I think we need to think of the sequence. After JCPOA, you have to have some good news of something happening, because you know that many who criticize the JCPOA say there is not enough in it on intentions on missiles or regional behavior of Iran. But if you then have as a follow-up discussion about regional cooperation, then you automatically have a reason to discuss regional conflicts and regional problems. That's just an idea.
That's a good way of framing it, because there's quite a lot of people who are saying that instead of the kind of returning to the nuclear deal, we should have a broader and better deal. But can that only happen in a more regional, as a part of more regional process? Susan, what do you think about the kind of the broader and better deal, or kind of a returning to the original plan?
Yeah, let me just do a brief comment on the previous question first, and then I'll get to your question. I don't think there's anyone advocating for in favor of nostalgia. I don't think anyone thinks just replicating what happened in the past and had success, and also had some failures, is the way to do it. So there's no effective arrangement or set of structures will be possible until implicitly or explicitly, let's say, the Saudis and Iranians, so that each side recognizes that the other side has a sense of threat and has a legitimate role to play. And this can only be addressed through dialogue. So that is really the theme that I'm trying to advance. And in terms of your question, there has been a big debate in the United States of whether to return to the JCPOA as it is, or is it time to try to get something bigger and better? And here is where reality has kicked in. The simple fact is we've had now maximum pressure policy towards Iran since May 2018. More sanctions, ratcheting up tensions. And what has it produced? It hasn't produced a better atmosphere. In fact, Iran's nuclear program has expanded dramatically, both in terms of enrichment capacity, both also in terms of their stockpile of enriched uranium and so forth. And also what we see in the region is a ongoing escalation of tension that, as I said before, almost brought us to the brink of war. So the problem with that strategy is that the Iranians won't come to the table and discuss it until we get back to our commitments, which we originally agreed to. So that's what they're trying to do in Vienna, is reconstitute the JCPOA. Yes, it has sunset clauses, but keep in mind that it is a non-proliferation agreement along with the NPT that would prevent Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. So it goes well beyond the sunsets too. And then the goal is to, once that is revived, open discussions on what the Biden team calls a longer and stronger nuclear deal, and then addressing topics in the region. The regional discussions are going to be very tough. There's no venue that is available to just discuss all of them at once, and there will be problems with that. Whereas with the JCPOA, we do have a venue. It's called the Joint Commission. So the regional discussions will have to be done in other multilateral fora. For example, on Yemen, there is a UN process that's seeking a political agreement, a political settlement that could be used. Others on Syria and other issues would have to be implemented. So the road ahead is not going to be easy, but I think at least the JCPOA, reconstituting it, gives us the basis to build on. And right now we don't have that. That floor has given away, has given out. There's no floor to build on. So that's why I think there's so much interest in getting it back up and running.
Any reflections on the audience questions or on the conversation that is ongoing?
Yeah, actually, thank you. I would like to react to Tytti Erästö's question about Europe being an example of failure. I would argue the opposite. And I used to do that very often when I was asked to talk in Indonesia or in Asia, to explain them about the raison d'être of the European Union and why it is important to us. And I usually started the presentation with referring to my own family, which has some IDPs or refugees after the war. And since the war, there has been 76 years of peace. And there has been integrated economy, fiscal system, political system, and to a large extent culture as well in Europe. So I don't buy this argument that the European Union is a failed a project or experiment. On the contrary, I think if other regions in the world, Middle East included, could even reach the first echelon of the level of the European integration, it would serve them well. And then, of course, we have the other security structures, NATO and OSCE. OSCE having 57 members, stretching from from Vancouver to Vladivostok, which is not exactly Europe. So encompassing that many members means that you have quite a heterogeneous club, and that is also reflecting in its efficiency. But at least you have a club where you can make statements, meet with your friends and adversaries, and use it as a platform for solving your differences, or at least voicing your concerns and positions. NATO, we are not a member, but of course we know that it is also sometimes scrutinized with the heavy heavy hand. And I think within NATO there's also the sense of you need to reform in order to keep your value, and this is of course happening in other European organizations as well. But maybe against this background, it's also good to highlight the value of the Nordics. I think out of all these brands, the Nordic brand is the most robust one, and of course it's also a fact that the smaller the club gets, the more exclusive and efficient it is, because it's the grade of like-mindedness is quite high. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those. There was also one question emailed to me, multi-channel multitasking happening in my brain, and that has to do with Jan, what you already brought out. The Helsinki process was based on these baskets, security, economic, and social baskets, and you already alluded that of course the regional stakeholders, they have to define what is in the baskets if there would be anything resembling the Helsinki process. But do you have any takes on what could be there? What would be the basics of anything regional in the wider region of MENA?
Well, I think I mentioned it, but in security, it's evident many issues in the security dialogue between those countries that are part of that structure. Economic exchange, extremely important, trade, of course. And I think there's a tremendous potential in people-to-people contacts, university contacts. And then I think you should look into interests that comes out of the economic and technical situation. Where you have their shipping, you have transport generally, you have environment, you have energy. It could be a very dynamic factor. But I would say, if I look at this whole set of issues, I think there are two things to do. One is to try to bring in the concrete elements of a dialogue that could lead up to a structure. Very modest beginning, but also starting from identifying their own interests. And so it is a project which is of their own. And I think the time is ripe now, since contacts are already now opening up, not least, most importantly, between Saudi and Iran. But the other thing is to work on the higher level of reaching some type of dialogue to reduce the enormous mistrust that we have around. And this goes for the region. It was almost impossible to even bring up Iran when I visited Saudi Arabia back in 14 and 15. And then I recall a conversation with Rafsanjani, the president, former president. He died later, a year afterwards, but he spoke rather tearfully about how very close he was to President Abdullah, to King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia. He said at all the meetings they met, they went in each other's cars, they were friends, and Rafsanjani was invited to Abdullah's home, and Rafsanjani said, I mean, this is not natural. We all gain from being good neighbors. And he had a very open conversation there at a meeting that I will never forget. But the other thing is, of course, the trust between US and Russia. Because if US and Russia now could move a little bit into the direction of identifying, of course, or recognizing the many problems they have, but if they could also identify some common interests. And one common interest that I see as chair of CIPRI is to look into the continued negotiations after New START was extended, which was a very good decision of the Biden administration. If you could see the beginning of a dialogue on something which reaches into the area of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, US and Russia moving on that, and also reducing the basic trust between the two, then we would have a much different atmosphere in the Security Council. So I think the trust building between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which I hope has started now. I hope, I'm not sure. There are many who do not want this to happen. I give no names. But also at the same time, the trust building between US and Russia, and if possible, also China and US, but that seems to be more difficult. But US and Russia, because it has ramifications on military expenditures and nuclear arms race, and by that non-proliferation, and by that JCPOA. So we have to move on the trust side, both in the region and globally, to make this happen. And then there are many of us wanting to help out, and both with research and ideas and venues and meeting places. But the main thing is that there is sort of a positive new element entering this. And of course, that element will be very positive if we see the US return to JCPOA. So, but as I said earlier, I claim that even without a US return to the JCPOA, I hope to God we will not be in that position. But even that, in that case, we need to work even harder on regional security.
Yeah, that was a good point, and a key part of the Helsinki process was also the lack of trust, and somehow it was managed to overcome. First, it was seen as some kind of a Trojan horse by the Soviet bloc. And then of course the historical lesson learned from the Helsinki process was that it was a contributing factor to the collapse of Soviet Union. So there's a lot of suspicions, but as Jan pointed out, that there's this kind of enlightened realism, or even power politically motivated realism, where you can think about different scenarios when this type of a confidence building would make sense also from kind of a more realist angle. But Jan, you also pointed out kind of the external stakeholders, Russia and US. And nowadays we have also others like China. Suzanne, is the game just too complicated when it's multipolar, no longer kind of only bipolar, to pull off something regional?
Well, I think if we take the approach that this has to be a homegrown effort, and the countries of the region have to take the lead with others helping to facilitate, then we have to be serious about that. But there's no question that Beijing is a growing player in the Middle East. Of course, they're also a member of the P5. So they're going to want to have a say and probably a seat at the table at least. We'll have to find common interest to move forward. I mean, thinking about the potential baskets, economic and security baskets, of course, but maybe there could be a human security basket added, especially in light of climate change. And when you look at the situation in the Middle East, where environmental degradation is such a serious issue, particularly related to water security, That could be a topic. And then, of course, pandemics, which has hit the COVID pandemic has hit the Middle East so hard, particularly Iran. So maybe expand our thinking on what those baskets are. And just to put a final point on it, I think looking to other models, not to replicate them, but maybe think of them more as vehicles for de-escalation, institutionalized dialogue, this trust building that we need so desperately, and gradual cooperation initiatives, including people-to-people exchanges. Then that is the model that's worth pursuing.
Good point. Kai, what do you think about the baskets? Susanne already, well, Jan was referring to the infrastructure and kind of thinking about that in
there's a long list of options, of course. I mean, all type of human activities can be involved, which were already mentioned by Jan and Susanne. I mean, COVID is now something which is creating needs for dialogue, regional dialogue, global dialogue. You have environment, climate change, water, security, fighting terrorism. I mean, it's really a long list. And but I just want to observe on the how to launch a process like this. UN, Jan referred to the UN and the role of the Secretary General and the binding nature of the Security Council resolution, which is technically true, but there are many resolutions which are not observed or which are violated. So there needs to be a political incentive to move on this. And we have seen that Secretary General Guterres, he has picked up the idea of a regional approach, and I think his rhetorics are based on the assumption that there's a larger political backing, and especially from the US side, which is I think quite a simple conclusion, because if you look at what the ICG produced under Rob Malley, and then look at the role Rob Malley is playing now in the US administration, so you can conclude that the chance is that his ideas from ICG are at least to a certain level transferred to the US administration. But then it also depends on the progress in the Vienna talks, how strong the appetite will be to continue on that track. The question of China and Russia is, of course, interesting. Like I said earlier, Russia has been backing the Iranian proposal of hope, and China's interest in the region is growing. Of course, China, for the time being, is increasingly also depending on fossil fuels. The energy consumption is big, and it will take a long time before they manage to converge it into sustainable energy. Russia, in terms of fossil fuels, they don't need to import it, at least not much. And America is moving away, at least under this administration, from fossil fuel dependency. So this might also play a role in the larger equation. What I have been waiting for is like it's like a signal which signals more political commitment and interest is appointment of a special envoy. I think that might be a step which comes next from an organization or individual country. So look at the UN, look at the EU, look at the big players. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one further question, and I suppose this is to Susan mostly, but others can comment as well. There has been recently discussions between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Do you see that as a kind of a opportunity that is arising, or should we are we putting too much hopes on these first signs of kind of a mutual dialogue? Susan, are you still there? Yeah, it seems that she dropped out. So Jan and Kai, can you answer this audience question? Is there too much hopes put into the first signs of kind of a Saudi-Iranian discussions?
Well, it's just the beginning of a process. Very little has come out, and it has been a long time of mistrust and enmity. You cannot also disregard the role of Israel in this situation. The enmity, the antagonism between Israel and Iran is not in any way reduced. And that is a factor which is constantly there, also has played a role in the JCPOA discussions, which also has ramifications for the internal discussion in the US. So I would say it's faint hope, but still hope. And if they go that direction and recognize that it is in their own interest to go this direction, the better. Because if you look at this from a larger perspective and longer perspective, the Middle East has been a huge headache for the last 15, 20 years. War after war, Syria, Yemen, Libya, all over, you know. And I think they are feeling that this is not only horrible in terms of suffering and death, but it's also sort of a signal to the outside world that they don't organize themselves for peace, for human security that Susan mentioned. I have come to the conclusion that in order to have a good foreign policy and a good basis to your foreign policy, you've got to have a good basis at home. I think this seems very much to be the Biden administration's view, that you've got to be stable and strong at home in order to be effective internationally. And I think what the countries in the Middle East need is peaceful societies. Peaceful societies who thrive and develop. They have enormous possibilities to be an enormously powerful and important region in the world. So I would say that if they move in the direction they do right now, to open up to recognize that geography is a fact and Iran is where it is, and that the risks of conflict will also be reduced by an effective security structure, then I think we are in business. Because it again, I come back to it all the time. It is related also to the future for their own nations, their own people. But that's a bit of wishful thinking. I just hope this will continue. We need to simply build trust in all directions right now. We are in a hurry.
Yes, good point. Susan, you are back. Did you hear the original question about?
No, I'm sorry. My Wi-Fi dropped out, so I missed the question.
Yeah, it is. The question had to do with the first signs, first steps taken between Iran and Saudi Arabia when it comes to dialogue. Are we putting too much hopes on that, kind of seeing a linear process, progressive process resulting from that? Or
Yeah.
is it something else?
Yeah, I don't think we should be very pragmatic about it. It is going to be a very difficult journey if it continues. But keep in mind, I think it was Jan who mentioned, good relations between the Saudis and Iranians have happened. I mean, we saw it during particularly the presidencies of Rafsanjani, and then even under President Khatami. So there is precedent for it. From a U.S. perspective, what I can say is, whether or not this current administration would be willing to use its ties to the Saudis, which are undergoing some changes now, that's for sure. And also, once the JCPOA is back up and running, using that rediscovered, perhaps leverage, albeit very limited leverage, with Tehran to persuade them that it's in their interest to develop an effective mode of engagement, and how to create that atmosphere of confidence, I think can be helped by outside powers helping to shape that into something more durable. So this is something that could take years. It's I think just the recent changes we've been discussing have opened the door to a possibility, but it's by no means a given that it'll move in this direction. And I think, as Jan alluded, there are spoilers waiting in the wings, more than waiting in the wings, very actively. Don't want to see this sort of dialogue take place for their own interests. So we have to be very realistic and cognizant about that too.
Thank you. Kai, do you have your hopes up when it comes to this recent development?
Well, not much to add to what Jan and Suzanne just said, but I think it is interesting how fast Saudi Arabia and Iran found the way to each other, which is a sign of the fact that the rift originally has not been very, very deep or long. And as Jan, he was referring to the royal connection to the president and the warm relationship and so forth. But and also the fact that the elements on both sides who seem to be talking, they are no softies. Those are security issues which are discussed, which is also a signal of a commitment and interest of a quite high degree. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. And unfortunately, the time is running out soon, and I just wish that this type of dialogue that we had today on the ideas and producing new ideas, some of them are, of course, historically have been there for quite a while. Markets of ideas exists, and we need to keep that going. The research institutes on this issue need to pay focus. Pay focus when the stars are aligning, and a little bit helping the stars align rightly. Suzanne referred to the opportunities that perhaps might be opening up because of shifts that are taking place currently. So we need to be ready for that and keep this discussion on this particular topic ongoing, so that it's not because of the lack of useful ideas and initiatives that the alignment of stars would be missed out. So I very much welcome the talk and discussion we had today, and I would like to thank the audience on participating actively, and also, of course, our excellent speakers. It was alignment of stars in a correct way that Jan and Suzanne and Kai could participate us this afternoon. I'm very grateful for this, and we will return to the topic, I'm sure, in the future. So we'll keep you posted. Thank you very much for the audience and for our speakers. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.